Consent. One word that can mean the difference between legal and illegal, freedom and prison, guilt and innocence. But does saying yes always make something legal? What if someone is tricked, threatened, or doesn't even understand what they're agreeing to? In this animated journey, we dive into real cases, shocking loopholes, and the fine print behind the law of consent in crime. Buckle up, this isn't as simple as yes or no. To me, we've got the guy who punched another man in the face so hard, he broke his nose. And now you're telling me he's not guilty of assault?
That's right, detective. Because the victim consented to it.
Oh really? Since when does sure, go ahead and punch Emmy single quote make it legal?
Since the law recognizes consent as a defense in some cases. This wasn't a random street fight. It happened inside a boxing ring, under official rules. Both men agreed to fight. You don't arrest a football player for tackling someone, do you?
Okay. So you're saying if they agree to it, there's no crime?
Not always. It depends on the circumstances. Consent isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. It has limits. Well, let's say the same boxer punched a guy outside the ring, same force, same injury. The victim didn't agree to that fight. Now it's assault.
Alright, so inside the ring, legal. Outside the ring, crime. But what about cases without physical violence? Depends on the case, right?
Bingo. And that's why consent is such a tricky legal issue. Let's break it down.
Alright, counselor, you got my attention. So let's break it down. What exactly counts as consent in the eyes of the law?
Great question. Legally speaking, consent means freely given, informed, and voluntary agreement to an act. But it only works as a defense under certain conditions.
Certain conditions? Huh. Like what?
Let's keep it simple. For consent to be valid, 3 things matter. Capacity, the person must be mentally and legally capable of consenting. Freedom, the consent must be given voluntarily, without threats or pressure. Knowledge, the person must understand what they're agreeing to. No tricks.
Okay, but let's be real. People agree to stupid things all the time. If I consent to let someone hit me with a baseball bat, is that legal?
Depends. Was it part of a regulated sport or a criminal act? The law protects people from serious harm, even if they agree to it. That's why you can consent to a boxing match, but not to being stabbed for fun.
So what about fights? If 2 guys agree to fight in the street, is it still illegal?
Most of the time, yes. Courts often rule that street fights cause public disorder, so consent doesn't apply. But in organized combat sports, like MMA, it's legal because there are rules and regulations.
So consent works sometimes, but not always. It has limits.
Exactly. And those limits get really tricky when we talk about sexual consent, fraud, and medical procedures.
I get the feeling you're about to hit me with another legal curveball.
Oh, you have no idea. Let's talk about cases where consent gets complicated, and where it might not matter at all.
Alright, counselor, you've convinced me that consent works in some cases, like boxing matches or certain fights. But you also said it doesn't always work. So, when does it not matter? Alright, hit me. What about sexual offenses?
In cases of rape or sexual assault, consent is everything. But here's the catch, not all consent is legally valid.
How can someone consent but not really consent?
2 big reasons: incapacity, if someone is drunk, unconscious, or underage, their consent is invalid. Coercion or threats, if someone agrees out of fear or pressure, that's not real consent.
Yeah, I've seen cases where victims were too scared to say no. Courts don't accept forced consent. Huh.
Exactly. And if someone is tricked, like if a doctor lies about a medical procedure to perform something sexual, that's fraudulent consent. The law doesn't allow deception to be used as a defense.
So if I lie to get consent, that doesn't count?
Depends on the lie. Let's say a guy pretends to be a plastic surgeon and performs an operation without a real license. The patient agreed to the surgery, but not under the truth. That's criminal.
Yeah, that's just straight up fraud.
And it gets crazier. There have been cases where men pretended to be someone else, like a twin brother or a celebrity, to get someone to sleep with them. Courts have ruled that's rape by deception.
Man, people will do anything. So, deception kills consent?
In certain cases, yes. It's all about knowledge. If someone wouldn't have agreed if they knew the truth, consent is void.
So, I can consent to getting punched in a boxing match, but not to someone cutting off my ear for fun?
Exactly. The law allows reasonable harm, like in sports or tattoos, but draws the line at extreme, unnecessary injury.
So, even if I say go ahead, the law says nope?
Pretty much. The law protects you from yourself sometimes.
Alright, hit me with a case where consent got complicated.
Let's talk about R vs. Brown, 1993. A group of men consented to extreme sadomasochistic acts, but the court ruled you can't consent to serious harm.
So even if they agreed, it was still a crime?
Exactly. And consent gets even trickier when people are tricked into agreeing. Let's talk about fraud and fake consent.
Alright, explain this. How can someone agree to something, but the law says their consent doesn't count?
Simple. If consent is based on lies, tricks, or hidden facts, it's not valid. In Deepak Gulati v. State of Haryana, 2013, a man promised marriage to a woman, they had a relationship, and later, he refused to marry her. The court ruled it was rape by deception, because he never actually intended to marry her.
Whoa. So if someone consents under false promises, it's a crime?
Bingo. A yes based on lies isn't a real yes. That's why the law steps in.
Man, criminal law is full of surprises. So, what if someone says yes, because they're scared?
That's coerced consent. If someone agrees under threats, blackmail, or force, the law treats it as no consent at all.
So, what have we learned? Consent is powerful, but it's not absolute. A yes doesn't count if it's based on lies, force, or serious harm. The law protects people, even from their own agreements sometimes. In criminal law, consent isn't just a word, it's a legal battlefield. And understanding its limits. That's what keeps justice in check.